I've been called many things over the years: caretaker, groundskeeper, hermit, the old man guarding a haunted estate. But none of those titles are correct. My real job, the one almost no one knows exists, is gamekeeper of Koel House. And if you think game refers to deer or birds, you're already misunderstanding everything. The only creatures Koel House hunts anymore are people. I wasn't always this person. I used to be ordinary, someone with a name, a life, a family, but decades spent on these grounds have quietly sanded those details away. Now I live in a shack 100 yards from the Iron Gate, surrounded by cameras, silence, and whatever patience is required to watch people walk into their own deaths. I'm writing this because conversation no longer exists for me, and memory fades faster when you're alone. Maybe that's my own warning sign. Maybe this story is the last thing that proves I was still myself, but enough about me. You want to hear about Koel House? The legends people whisper online barely scratch the surface. They talk about the Christmas massacre, the murdered Koel family, the ghosts of the long-dead servants, and the cursed treasure vault. And when they want something more scandalous, they claim the ghost of Alice Cole still seduces visitors. None of it is true, but the truth is far worse. Koel House was built in 1857, 3 stories of Gothic stone, seated on a lonely patch of Maine forest, miles from the nearest township. Edward Koel built it for his sprawling family, his wife Gertrude, their adult children, their lovers, their grandchildren, 40 servants, and enough livestock to sustain an entire village. It was never a site of rituals, never a murder house, never a playground for depravity. The Coles died of influenza, nothing more sensational than that. A blizzard trapped them inside for weeks. Disease moved faster than help could. By the time rescuers reached the mansion, every living thing inside, families, servants, animals, was dead. That should have been the end of the story. But the house didn't rot. It didn't collapse. It didn't even lose its shine. Instead, it waited. And as years passed, the truth revealed itself. Koel House wasn't haunted by the dead. It was hungry for the living. Houses crave occupants. That's natural. But Koel House doesn't crave new families. No, it wants its original ones back. Every Koel, every servant, every animal. And because the dead cannot return, it reshapes those foolish enough to enter. That is where I come in. Tourists love the place. They sneak over the wall, constantly ghost hunters, thieves, influencers, urban explorers, drawn like moths to a flame they don't understand. The mayor of Indigo hires people like me to be gamekeepers, though most outsiders think we're caretakers or shut-ins. My job is simple: warn intruders once, and if they don't listen, keep the truth contained. They never listen. The house lures them deeper, nudging them toward a bedroom, any bedroom. Something in the walls calls to them, a silent urge that guides them straight to the spot where a Koel once slept. Once they cross that threshold, the transformation begins. A little drowsiness at first, just enough to make them lie down, and if they sleep, they're gone. Their clothes remain for me to burn, their cars for me to dismantle. Their disappearance explained away by the same unnatural apathy that keeps the police from caring. But the ones who manage to stagger out before collapsing, those require cleanup. Those are the ones I have to follow, find, and quietly escort back before the change takes hold completely. Sometimes I catch them early, when they're only speaking oddly or misremembering their own lives. Other times I find them at bars closed, hanging loose, hair whitening, skin sagging, teeth loosening, bodies reshaping into someone long dead. And when that happens, there's nothing left to do but bring them home, back to Koel House, where the family waits to be reborn. Most intruders don't even make it out of the house before their minds begin to blur. Each bedroom carries its own signature, its own imprint left behind by the Koel who once slept there. Those who wander into Alice's room start glancing down at their stomachs, stroking themselves subconsciously, their minds drifting toward memories that aren't theirs. The ones who enter the children's room start regressing in the most humiliating ways, tongue out, thumb in mouth, giggling at grown adults like schoolyard bullies. But the most common cases are the ones who manage to stumble out before their bodies betray them. They head to the nearest bar or motel, thinking they've escaped with treasure, photos, or a good story. That's when I follow them, not to harm them, never that, but because the transformation once started cannot be stopped, and if they remain among the public, they'll cause panic long before their bodies finish remaking themselves. I've done this job long enough to know the rhythm of a victim's collapse. Psychological signs first, forgotten names, incorrect memories, habits belonging to someone born in 1870. Then come the physical shifts, hair graying, bones aching, teeth loosening, posture shrinking or swelling. Their clothes never fit for long. Their voices crack and warp. They cling to reality for as long as they can, but Koel House always wins. My first solo case was back in 1999. Mr. Gatewood had retired, and I was desperate to prove I could handle things alone. 2 burglars broke in clever, confident, convinced they'd hit the jackpot in antiques and jewelry. I warned them, of course. They laughed. Everyone laughs. An hour later, I found them in a roadside motel, staring at their reflections in horror. They had aged 40 years in less than 60 minutes. Their muscles had wasted. Their hair was silver. One had a stoop so deep he could barely lift his head. They begged me for a cheer, crying, offering everything they owned, swearing they'd give the loot back if I could just stop whatever was happening to them. But that's the thing. Once Koel House chooses you, you don't get a choice. I drove them around for an hour as the change overtook the rest of their bodies. Their voices went soft and polite. Their memories slipped. By the time we reached the mansion, they weren't thieves anymore. They were Edward and Gertrude Koel, bewildered, newly reborn, slipping seamlessly into routines they had lived more than a century ago. Koel House welcomed them without a sound. Every following week brought replacement servants, children, cousins, spouses, until the family was whole again. The house glowed when full, its hallways warm and waiting, as if the walls themselves were relieved. But the family doesn't last forever. Koel House can resurrect them, can remake their bodies and minds, but it cannot sustain them indefinitely. Each December, when the family gathers and performs their last toast of the year, the same scene repeats. They melt, not gruesome, not in the way humans imagine horror, but slow, weary, as if their bodies finally decide to surrender to gravity. Skin softens, bones dissolve, their faces slump into formless masks. Their voices become low, liquid mutterings as clothing collapses around them. They flow down the steps, hundreds of them, generations of them, into the deepest cellar, where the vast underground cistern waits. There, they pool together into a single shimmering lake of humanity. Hundreds of minds dreaming in the dark, whispering to each other in voices that are neither alive nor dead. Every year I watch them descend and think the same thing. They look peaceful, too peaceful. Too peaceful. People assume the melting is the worst thing I've ever witnessed, but they couldn't be more wrong. Koel House has far more grotesque ways of reclaiming what it thinks belongs to it. The truth is, not every intruder becomes a member of the family. Some become something else entirely. See, the house doesn't only miss the Koels. It misses their animals, the hounds, the horses, the single spoiled cat that once slept on a velvet pillow beside the fireplace. And every so often, when the house wants one of those creatures back, it chooses a visitor who unknowingly walks into the wrong part of the mansion. The transformation is crueler. I've seen a grown man stagger out of the stables on all fours, back cracking, ribs reshaping, teeth sharpening into canine points. He tried to bark at me, half plea, half warning, before bolting into the darkness like a wounded hunting dog. Others aren't so lucky. Some scream until their voices warp into neighs or guttural whimpers as their legs stretch into hooves and their spines bend into impossible curves. They run blindly through the estate until exhaustion stops them, trembling, half-human silhouettes caught between worlds. The cat transformations are the gentlest, if you can call them that. Visitors fall asleep and wake up curled somewhere warm, already too small to wear their own clothes, drifting into feline instincts they can't resist, that don't even remember the change, just blink their new yellow eyes and wander off. There is no easy part of this job, only degrees of horror. But the darkest moment of my entire career happened in 2001, and it was my fault. For months, I had convinced myself that the transformation had a limit, that if someone got far enough away from Koel House, it would stop. I wanted to help people. I wanted to break the cycle. So when 3 intruders escaped one night, I made the decision that nearly killed me. I drove them as far as I could miles away, out past the back roads, past Indigo, into the deep forests where the house's presence supposedly faded. They were terrified, begging for help, clutching at their stomachs and chests as the first waves of change set in. I thought I was saving them. I wasn't. 2 hours later, police reported a wounded hitchhiker screaming about a creature in the woods. I tracked the area and found the truth. The transformation hadn't stopped. It had simply lost guidance. What I found was a malformed, horror part horse, part man, part woman, fused together in a blood-slicked tangle of limbs and torsos. A head that wasn't fully human or animal, 2 pairs of hands where hooves should have been, bodies grafted into each other in ways that defied anatomy. Its cries were gurgling, broken, filled with panic and instinct and agony. Julian, Maria, and the horse that had once lived on the estate. All 3 of them trapped in a single monstrous shell. I had to shoot it twice in each head before it stopped thrashing. The cleanup took hours, and I burned through a chainsaw blade trying to carve that nightmare into pieces small enough to bury. And when I returned to Koel House, it screamed. Not a human scream, not even an animal one. Something deeper. A house crying out in rage because I had denied it the residence it wanted. 3 souls it had marked but failed to claim properly. That sound echoed in the walls for days, rattling picture frames and shaking dust from the rafters. After that night, I stopped trying to save anyone. I understood then, Koel House always gets what it wants. Attempts to fight Koel House never end well. Not for visitors, not for the town council, not even for armed demolition crews. I've watched officials bring in wrecking balls, bulldozers, even a small battery of artillery one year. They fired shell after shell into the facade, only to watch the impacts vanish into the brick as though the house were swallowing them whole. Koel House stood untouched, as pristine as the day it was built. That's when the council realized something important. You don't destroy Koel House, you endure it. And so Indigo kept hiring gamekeepers, and we kept handling the intruders. And the cycle continued year after year, victim after victim. But every once in a long while, someone resists the house, not just physically, mentally. Someone whose will is strong enough to push back against the transformation, if only for a short while. Those are the most tragic cases of all. I'll never forget the ghost hunter from 2012, Bill Harker, 40 years old, desperate for proof of the supernatural, desperate to save his failing marriage, and arrogant enough to think he could outsmart the stories. He brushed past my warnings with a dismissive laugh and went inside, hunting for a legend he thought would make him famous. Bad luck led him straight into the nursery. He made it out of the house and into his RV, but he wasn't hard to follow. His driving was erratic, sometimes too fast, sometimes barely creeping along signs that his body and mind were already beginning to slip. When I finally caught up to him at a gas station, I was expecting the usual symptoms: shrinking limbs, squeaking voice, maybe missing teeth, but he looked completely normal. Then he looked up at me, and for a split second, his face was that of a terrified 9-year-old boy. Then, through sheer force of will, he clenched his eyes shut and forced himself back into adulthood. His skin stretched, bones lengthened, jaw reformed. He trembled like someone fighting off a seizure. Then he climbed back into his RV and drove away, refusing to accept what was happening to him. I chased him for a week. He barely slept, terrified he would transform in his sleep and never come back. He stayed in motels, parking lots, dark roadsides, anywhere he could monitor himself. But the transformation pushed harder every hour. One moment he'd speak like a man, the next he'd whimper like a child. His clothes sagged around him, then tightened, then sagged again as his body fought itself in looping cycles. By the 7th day, he could barely reach the pedals. I found him at midnight trying and failing to ram his RV into an occult library, convinced they had answers. He wasn't even strong enough to knock the door open. He was pounding on it with little fists drowning in the sleeves of his flannel shirt. His voice swung wildly between adult and toddler with every cry for help. People romanticize rejuvenation. They imagine youth returning in a soft glow. What I saw was bones crunching as they shrank, clothes deflating around him, muscles reversing, his face swelling with baby fat, then snapping back to adulthood before crumpling again. It was horrific, an endless tug of war between the man he wanted to be and the child the house demanded, and then it happened. His wedding ring slipped off his finger. He lunged for it, screaming a raw, broken sound. The ring rolled toward a storm drain gleaming under the street lamp. He reached for it with tiny hands, but the ring slipped through the grate and disappeared forever. When he looked up at me, something inside him had shattered, the last ember of hope gone. He handed me the keys without a word. By the time we reached Koel House, he could barely walk. I swaddled him in his oversized coat and carried him to the porch, where Livia opened the door with a serene smile. When she lifted him from my arms, his last flicker of adulthood faded from his eyes. Bill Harker was gone. Baby Marcus had come home. I never forgot that first full year on the job, because it taught me what Koel House truly was. Not a haunted mansion and not a gateway to hell, but a hungry thing that remembered every soul it ever held. And every so often it reminded me just how far it would go to reclaim them. The year after the burglars turned into Edward and Gertrude, I saw something worse. Something that made me understand why the mayor warned me never to interfere with the transformation. The town council had been arguing for months about shutting the place down for good. They were tired of missing tourists, tired of the lies, tired of relying on gamekeepers to clean up what the house devoured. A new council member even suggested tearing the place apart, brick by brick, and burning whatever was left. They didn't get far. One early spring morning, before the fog lifted from the grounds, the demolition contractors arrived with cranes and drills. Their engines rumbled through the trees, shaking dust off the eaves. I watched from my shack with a sick feeling, because Koel House had been silent all night, too silent. It never slept deeply unless it was waiting. The workmen barely had time to unload their equipment before the screaming started. It wasn't human at first, it was the house. The walls groaned, the windows rattled like grinding teeth, and a low vibration rolled across the estate hard enough to rattle the tools in my shed. I'd heard the house breathe before, but this was the first time I heard it scream, and when Koel House screamed, every bird in the forest took off at once, scattering into the sky like they were fleeing a predator. By the time I ran toward the front lawn, the contractors were stumbling back through the gates, faces white, shouting that the floors had collapsed under their feet, that hands had reached up through the boards, grabbing their boots, trying to drag them under. They weren't lying. I could smell the dust from torn wood and hear the creaking timbers settling like a wounded animal. The council scrapped the demolition that same afternoon, and I understood, with a kind of cold clarity, that nothing man-made could destroy Koel House. Not fire, not wrecking balls, not even explosives. The mayor later said quietly that even artillery had failed in the 1950s. All they'd managed to do was crack a few windows before the house healed. But the worst horrors weren't from the house protecting itself. They came from the transformations. I learned that not every victim becomes a perfect Koel. Some warp wrong. The first one I ever had to put down was a tourist who wandered into the stables. Maybe he dreamed of horses as a kid. Maybe he lingered too long around the old saddles. Whatever it was, the house latched onto it. By the time I found him, he was halfway between man and animal. Long limbs bending backward, his jaw stretching, making wet, choking sounds. He tried to run from me, hooves slamming on the stones, skin hanging in strips where bone forced its way through. I still have nightmares about the sound he made when I tranquilized him. A broken, panicked shriek that echoed until the house swallowed him back inside. The next day, a new mare stood in the paddock, calm as any creature born to the estate. That was the first time I understood why the gamekeepers never last long. Not physically. Koel House feeds us, keeps us healthy, but mentally, you can only watch so many people change shape, lose their minds, or melt into the cistern before you feel something inside you softening, loosening, thinning. Some nights, I'd sit in my shack and catch myself staring at the manor's lit windows, wondering what room would call to me when my time finally came, wondering whose life I'd slip into when the disease in my blood made retirement impossible, wondering if, after everything I'd seen, surrender would feel like stepping into warm water, because Koel House never forces you. Not in the end. It only whispers and waits. 2001 was the first year I made a mistake big enough to haunt me. I'd convinced myself that maybe, just maybe, the transformation only worked inside the estate, that if someone got far enough away, they'd stop changing. Foolish hope, but hope all the same. 3 intruders had broken in one night, all of them young, loud, fearless in the way people are before the world shows them its teeth. They slipped into Rufus's room, which meant the house had chosen them for something beautiful and terrible. Creative souls, eccentric minds, artists. Koel House had always been fond of those. When they stumbled out in a panic, half asleep, shaking with the early stages of disorientation, I thought I could save them, thought I could do something good. So instead of contacting the mayor, I drove them miles away deep into the next county. Far from Indigo, far from the house's reach, I dropped them off at a gas station and told them to call their families. 2 hours later, the hospital called the mayor, and the mayor called me. A hiker had been dragged into the ER, half delirious, covered in blood that wasn't hers, screaming about something growing in the woods. Something huge. Something with too many limbs, too many faces. When I reached the site, the forest felt wrong, not haunted guilty. Like the trees themselves were holding their breath. The smell hit me next, a coppery rot mixed with damp leaves. And then I saw it. I used to think nothing could shock me after watching people melt into puddles of half-conscious flesh. But this thing was different. It was a fusion, 3 lives mashed together and threaded through the remains of a horse from the old logging trail. A centaur shape, but warped, broken, wrong in every possible way. The horse's torso had merged with Julian's upper body, ribs pushing through skin like roots through soil. Maria's torso protruded sideways from the creature's back, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Arms fused, legs fused, bones twisted, and beneath all of it, something still breathing. One of the creature's heads lifted at the sound of my footsteps, its eyes bright with a desperate, hateful recognition, not of me, but of itself. I don't know if the house would have eventually claimed this abomination and reshaped it correctly, or if it had been doomed the moment I interfered. I never got the chance to find out. It lunged. I fired. Twice into each head, it kept moving. I fired again. When it finally collapsed, the forest exhaled as if relieved, and in that moment of silence, something else rose a sound I'd never heard before, and hope I never hear again. Koel House screamed, not from anger, not from pain, but from loss. I'd taken something it considered its own, something it was trying to fix, trying to reclaim. I had denied it a resident, and Koel House does not tolerate loss. I destroyed the body before anyone else could see it, hacked it apart, burned what I could, buried the rest. My chainsaw broke halfway through. My hands blistered. My nerves shook for days afterward. When I returned to the estate grounds, every door in the house was open. Every window glowed faintly as though lit from inside by a soft pulse. The house didn't speak, doesn't need to, but that night it stared at me. And I knew exactly what the message was. Never interfere again. I haven't since. From that year forward, I stopped hoping for escapes. Stopped imagining a life where tourists could be warned, where the police could shut the place down, where the Koel family could be laid to rest. Koel House is older than the town, older than the myths around it, maybe older than the land itself. I don't protect the house, I don't serve it. I just clean up after it, and every year the job gets a little harder. And every year the house watches me a little more closely. For a long time after the centaur incident, I thought I'd seen the worst Koel House could produce. I'd learned my lesson the hard way. Never let a victim escape the house's influence. Never allow the transformation to run wild. Never interfere with the cycle. But Koel House still had more to teach me. Lessons carved into bone and memory. Some victims don't resist, some run. But the rarest and most dangerous are the ones who fight back. That brings me to Bill Harker, a ghost hunter obsessed with proving the supernatural was real. The kind of man who believed every abandoned building held a demon and every cold spot was a spirit trying to communicate. He came armed with cameras, EMF detectors, EVP recorders, the usual theatrics. I warned him, of course, but believers are the same as skeptics. Both assume they're too smart to fall for a curse. Harker entered the nursery. That detail matters. The nursery never makes adults. It only takes. I expected the same pattern as always. The drowsiness, the disorientation, the first regressions. But somehow, through sheer brute force of will, Harker fought it. He staggered out of the house pale and trembling, but unchanged. He drove off in the RV he'd parked outside the wall. I thought I'd get him back within an hour, maybe 2. I spent 7 days chasing him. Every hour that passed, the transformation pressed harder, trying to drag him back into childhood. And every hour, he fought it. His body flickered between ages like a skipping film reel. One moment 40, the next 12, then 6, then 20, then back to 30. I once watched him lean on a payphone as a grown man and slide down into an 8-year-old before standing again as a teenager. It shouldn't have been possible. No one had ever resisted that long. He wasn't sleeping. Couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, his body tried to finish the process. He burst into diners asking strangers if they knew a cure. Tried breaking into churches, tried calling his wife with hands that kept shrinking off the receiver. Once he even walked into the mayor's office screaming that he was coming apart. Still, he fought. Until the 7th night, I found him at a gas station, attacking the locked door of an occult bookshop across the street. He wasn't trying to steal anything, he was begging for help, voice cracking between a man's baritone and a child's whimper. His jacket, now enormous, kept sliding down his shoulders. His pants had fallen around his ankles. He was kicking the door with legs that shortened every few seconds. When he saw me, he didn't run. He only whispered, "Please, help me stay me." But strength doesn't last forever. Something inside him finally broke. It happened when his wedding ring slipped off his shrinking finger and rolled toward the gutter. He threw himself forward, reaching, clawing, sobbing. But by the time he touched the ring, his arm had shriveled to that of a toddler. The ring fell through the grate and vanished into darkness. That was the moment his last hope died. He didn't fight anymore, didn't plead, didn't argue. He simply handed me his keys. By the time we reached Koel House, he couldn't walk. I carried him to the porch wrapped in his oversized jacket. His face flickered between ages until it finally settled, soft, round, helpless. Baby Marcus opened his new eyes and looked at the world with no memory of Bill Harker. Livia greeted us at the door, arms open, smiling like she'd been waiting for her grandson to come home. Harker's final expression before fading completely was peaceful, a strange relief after a week of terror. Koel House never punishes willpower. It simply waits until you have none left. People assume the worst part of this job is the deaths, or the transformations, or the things Koel House creates when a victim strays too far. But none of that is as dangerous as the quiet moments, the ones when the house feels almost peaceful. Those are the moments when you forget what it is, and those are the moments when gamekeepers choose to join it. Most visitors who willingly give themselves to Koel House aren't mystics or thrill seekers. They aren't people searching for immortality. They're men like me, gamekeepers who've spent too many years in isolation, too many nights listening to the house breathe, too many dawns watching the family gather in the halls like living memories. We spend decades here, alone, no friends, no marriage, no children. Just a shack, a job, and a house that whispers every time the wind shifts. The pension means nothing. The outside world means even less. My predecessors all chose their endings. Mr. Lintel, dying from tuberculosis, walked willingly into Livia's room and let his past dissolve. He wrote in his journal that he was finally free from this loveless husk. His last act before the transformation took hold was to unmake himself with a smile. Mr. Turmal, turnkey, broken by a stroke, surrendered himself to Gideon's body. Eager to forget the life that had soured around him, Gatewood, the man who trained me, chose Rufus. Cancer eating through his stomach, he practically laughed as the house welcomed him back into an artist's hands. And me? My fate waits inside my skull. Alzheimer's runs through my bloodline like a curse. I know what's coming. I can already feel the edges sometimes, a momentary lapse, a misplaced memory, a thought drifting where it shouldn't. That's why I write this. Not for the police, not for the world. The house hides its secrets too well for outsiders to ever understand. I write because words keep me anchored, because conversation, even on paper, reminds me who I am right now. A gamekeeper. Not a resident. Not yet. Every year, I watch the Koel family return piece by piece. One by one, the visitors melt into their shapes. Edward, Gertrude, Livia, Rufus, Alice, Julian, and the children. They laugh, they dine, they wander the halls unaware that the world outside is a century older. The house gives them a life without time, without pain, without memory, and at the end of every year I watch them melt again. Faces sagging, bodies liquefying into whispering pools of mind and memory. All of them, every victim since 1895, drifting into the cistern beneath the house like a dreaming sea. Koel House isn't evil. It isn't good either. It is hungry in the way. Fire is hungry. for purpose, for inhabitants, for the shape of the family it lost. It wants to be lived in. It wants its rooms filled. It wants laughter in the parlor and footsteps on the stairs. And one day soon it will want me. Sometimes at night, when the wind turns just right, I swear I hear it calling, not with words. Koel House doesn't speak, but its windows seem to breathe. Its wallpaper seems to shift. And every so often, a particular bedroom light flickers on without power or cause, waiting, inviting, promising a life without loneliness, without pain, without the slow decay of a failing mind. I stand at my shack window and stare at that glowing room until the light fades again. I'm not ready, I whisper. But the house has all the time in the world, and when the day comes, when my memory finally cracks, when my name slips from my tongue, when the world outside becomes too far to reach, I know exactly where I'll go. Koel House will open a door for me, and I will walk through it.